The letter arrived in Philadelphia on a Tuesday morning in March of 1882, and Delilah Crawford knew before she even opened it that her entire world was about to change forever. She sat at the cramped kitchen table in her aunt's boarding house, staring at the careful handwriting that spelled out her name, and felt her hands begin to tremble as she broke the seal. Inside, a man named Preston Dalton from Alpine, Texas had responded to the advertisement she had placed in the matrimonial newspaper 3 weeks prior, and his words were kind but honest, telling her about his cattle ranch, his small but sturdy home, and his hope that she might consider becoming his wife. What he did not mention, what he could not have known, was that Delilah had a secret that made most men turn away in disgust or pity, a condition that her aunt called a curse and the doctor called strabismus, but which Delilah simply thought of as the reason her left eye wandered lazily outward while her right eye looked straight ahead. She read the letter 5 times before she allowed herself to believe it was real. Preston Dalton wrote about needing a partner, someone strong enough to handle the harsh Texas landscape and sensible enough to manage a household. He mentioned loneliness in a way that made her chest ache with recognition. He said nothing about beauty or perfection, only about character and determination. Delilah folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her heart, wondering if the stranger could possibly mean what his words suggested, or if he would take one look at her mismatched gaze and send her right back to Philadelphia on the next train. Her aunt found her still sitting there an hour later, the letter clutched in her hands. "Well?" Aunt Margaret asked, her voice sharp with impatience. "What does he say?" "He wants me to come to Alpine," Delilah said quietly. "He has enclosed money for the train ticket and says I should wire him when I will arrive." Aunt Margaret sniffed, crossing her arms over her ample chest. "Texas, God-forsaken wilderness, from what I hear, full of outlaws and savages. But I suppose it is better than staying here, eating my food and taking up space." Delilah had lived with her aunt for 3 years, ever since her parents had died of fever, and she had earned her keep by cooking, cleaning, and helping manage the boarding house. "If you wish to withdraw your offer, I will understand completely and hold no ill will." She sealed the letter before she could change her mind and posted it the next morning. For 2 weeks, she heard nothing, and every day that passed felt like confirmation that she had been a fool to hope. But then another letter arrived, this one shorter than the first, and when she opened it with shaking hands, she found only 3 sentences written in that same careful script. "Your honesty does you credit. I am not looking for a perfect wife, only a true one. The train ticket is enclosed. Come as soon as you are able." Delilah sat down hard on the boarding house steps and cried for the first time in years. 3 weeks later, she stood on the platform of the train station in Alpine, Texas, with a worn carpetbag at her feet and her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The journey had taken 5 days, and she was covered in dust and exhausted down to her bones. But she forced herself to stand straight and keep her chin up as she scanned the crowd for a man she had never seen. The April sun beat down mercilessly, and the air smelled of creosote and cattle and something wild that Philadelphia had never prepared her for. "Miss Crawford." She turned toward the voice and found herself looking at a man who stood about 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore a plain cotton shirt, work-worn trousers, and a hat that shaded his face, but she could see his eyes clearly, and they were the color of warm honey. He was perhaps 27 or 28, she guessed, with a strong jaw and work-roughened hands that he held carefully at his sides as though he was not quite sure what to do with them. "Mr. Dalton?" she asked, and her voice came out steadier than she had expected. "Yes, madam." He took off his hat and held it against his chest, and she saw that his brown hair was flattened by sweat and needed a trim. "I am pleased to meet you. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," she admitted, "but I managed well enough." They stood there for a moment, and she watched his gaze move across her face. She saw the exact moment when he noticed her eye, saw the slight widening of his expression. But he did not flinch or step back or show any of the disgust she had learned to expect. Instead, he just nodded once, as though confirming something to himself. "You look tired," he said quietly. "Let me get your bag, and we will head to the hotel. I have reserved you a room for tonight. Tomorrow, if you are still agreeable, we can go to the church and make this official." Delilah felt something in her chest ease slightly. "You still want to marry me?" Preston Dalton met her gaze directly, not looking away from her wandering eye, not pretending it did not exist. "I told you in my letter, Miss Crawford. I am not looking for perfect. I am looking for true. Unless you have changed your mind." "No," she said quickly. "No, I have not changed my mind." "Then we are settled." He picked up her carpetbag as though it weighed nothing and gestured toward the main street. "Come on. Alpine is not much, but it is home." She followed him through the dusty streets, taking in the rough wooden buildings, the saloons and general stores, the horses tied to hitching posts and the men who watched her pass with open curiosity. Alpine was small, probably no more than a few hundred people, nestled in the high desert country of West Texas with mountains rising in the distance like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. It was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like anywhere she had ever been, and she felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Preston led her to a small hotel on the main street and arranged for her room with quiet efficiency. He carried her bag upstairs himself and set it just inside the door, then stepped back into the hallway as though afraid to crowd her. "There is a dining room downstairs," he said. "I will come by at 6 o'clock to take you to supper, if that is agreeable." "That is very agreeable," Delilah said. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton." "Preston," he said. "You should call me Preston, seeing as we are about to be married. Then you must call me Delilah." He nodded, and she thought she saw the hint of a smile touch the corner of his mouth. "Delilah, that is a pretty name." "It means delicate," she said, then immediately wished she had not, because it made her sound as though she was fishing for compliments. But Preston just shook his head. "I do not think that fits you at all. You came all the way from Philadelphia by yourself, to a place you had never seen, to marry a stranger. That is not delicate. That is brave." Something warm unfurled in Delilah's chest, something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was like. Hope, she realized, felt like hope. Preston left her to rest, and she spent the afternoon washing the train dust from her skin and hair, changing into her best dress, which was a simple blue cotton that was 3 years old but still serviceable. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw the same face she had always seen, one eye looking straight ahead and one drifting to the side, making her appear as though she was looking at 2 different places at once. She had learned long ago not to let it bother her, but tonight, knowing she would be sitting across from Preston at supper, knowing that tomorrow she would become his wife, she felt the old familiar shame creep back in. She pushed it away and went downstairs at 6 o'clock precisely. Preston was waiting in the small lobby, and he had changed into a clean shirt and combed his hair back from his face. He offered her his arm with a kind of formal courtesy that surprised her, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the cotton fabric. They ate at the hotel dining room, which was crowded with cowboys and ranchers and traveling salesmen, and Preston ordered them both steak and potatoes and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The food was good, and Delilah found herself relaxing as they talked. Preston told her about his ranch, which was about an hour's ride from town, and about the cattle he raised and the difficulties of ranching in the harsh Texas climate. He spoke plainly and honestly, not trying to paint a prettier picture than reality warranted. "It is hard work," he said, cutting into his steak. "The winters can be bitter cold, and the summers are brutal. Water is always a concern. We get rattlesnakes and scorpions, and the cattle can be ornery. But the land is beautiful in its own way, and it is mine. Well, it will be ours if you agree to marry me. I do agree, Delilah said. That is why I am here. Yes, but you have not seen the ranch yet, Preston pointed out. You have not seen what you are agreeing to. I have seen poverty and charity and the cold eyes of people who think I am cursed, Delilah said quietly. I am willing to take my chances on hard work and rattlesnakes. Preston set down his fork and looked at her directly, his honey-colored eyes serious. You are not cursed. You do not know that. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. I know it the same way I know the sun will rise tomorrow and the cattle will need feeding and the land will test me every single day. You are not cursed, Delilah. You just have an eye that does not track the same as the other one. That is all. It does not make you less, and it does not make you wrong. Delilah felt her throat tighten, and she had to look down at her plate to keep from crying. No one had ever said such a thing to her before. Her parents had loved her but pitied her. Her aunt thought she was unmarriageable. The few men who had courted her in Philadelphia had always ended up staring at her eye with poorly concealed discomfort until they made their excuses and disappeared. You are being very kind, she managed. I am being honest, Preston corrected. There is a difference. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Preston walked her back upstairs to her room. He stood in the hallway again, keeping a respectful distance, and she found herself wishing he would step closer, would touch her hand or her cheek, would give her some sign that he felt even a fraction of the strange pull she was beginning to feel toward him. I will come by at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. The Reverend will meet us at the church. We will need 2 witnesses, but I have asked my foreman and his wife to stand up with us. That sounds perfect, Delilah said. Are you nervous? He asked suddenly. She considered lying, but his earlier words about honesty echoed in her mind. Yes. Are you terrified? He admitted, and she saw the corner of his mouth cork up in a self-deprecating smile. I have never been married before. I am not entirely sure what I am supposed to do. Neither am I, Delilah confessed. I suppose we will figure it out together. I suppose we will. He settled his hat back on his head. Sleep well, Delilah. You too, Preston. She watched him walk down the hallway and disappear down the stairs, and then she went into her room and closed the door. She lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the man who had looked at her wandering eye and called her brave instead of broken. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Delilah dressed in her best traveling suit, a gray wool that was far too warm for the Texas heat, but was the nicest thing she owned. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and studied her reflection one last time, trying to see herself the way Preston seemed to see her. Brave, he had said. True. She straightened her shoulders and left the room. Preston was waiting downstairs again, and this time he wore a suit coat over his clean shirt, though she noticed his boots were still work-worn and dusty. He looked nervous and serious and unbearably young, and she felt a sudden rush of affection for this man who was about to bind his life to hers based on nothing more than letters and hope. You look very fine, he said when he saw her. So do you, she replied. They walked together to the small white church at the end of the main street, and Delilah tried not to think about how different this was from the wedding she had imagined as a girl. There would be no crowd of friends and family, no elaborate dress, no flowers or music or celebration. Just her and Preston and 2 strangers and a reverend who probably married people every week without remembering their names. But when they reached the church and Preston opened the door for her, she found that she did not care about any of that. What mattered was the way Preston took her hand carefully in his as they walked down the short aisle, and the way his voice was steady when he spoke his vows, and the way he looked at her like she was exactly what he had been hoping for. The Reverend was a kind-faced older man who kept the ceremony short and simple. The witnesses were Preston's foreman, a weathered man named Jack Wilson, and his wife Sarah, a sturdy woman with laugh lines around her eyes who smiled encouragingly at Delilah. When the Reverend asked if Preston would take Delilah as his lawfully wedded wife, Preston said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear and certain through the small church. And when the Reverend asked Delilah the same question, she looked at Preston's honest face and felt that flutter of hope again, stronger this time. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend said. "You may kiss your bride." Preston leaned down and kissed her softly, briefly, and Delilah felt the warm press of his lips against hers and the gentle way his hand cupped her cheek. When he pulled back, his ears were slightly red, and she realized he was blushing. They signed the registry, and Jack and Sarah signed as witnesses, and just like that, Delilah Crawford became Delilah Dalton. They walked out of the church into the bright April sunshine as husband and wife, and Preston helped her up into the wagon he had waiting at the hitching post. "The ranch is about an hour from here," he said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "I hope the ride is not too rough for you." "I will be fine," Delilah assured him. They rode out of Alpine into the wide open country beyond, and Delilah found herself mesmerized by the landscape. The mountains in the distance were purple and gold in the morning light, and the desert stretched out in all directions, dotted with scrubby vegetation and the occasional stunted tree. The sky was bigger than anything she had ever seen, an endless blue dome that made her feel both insignificant and exhilarated. Preston drove the wagon with easy competence, and he pointed out landmarks as they traveled. The creek that ran through his property when it rained, though it was dry now. The line of hills that marked the western boundary of his land. The distant smudge that was his nearest neighbor's ranch, 5 miles away. "It is isolated," he said, glancing at her. "I hope that does not trouble you." "I think I will like it," Delilah said honestly. "I have spent my whole life in a city full of people who stared at me. It will be a relief to have some space." Preston's expression softened. "People stared at you because they were small-minded fools. Or because I look strange. You do not look strange." His voice was firm again, that same certainty he had shown at supper. "You look different, maybe, but different is not the same as wrong." Delilah did not know what to say to that, so she stayed quiet and watched the landscape roll past. After about 45 minutes, Preston turned the wagon off the main trail and followed a smaller track through a stand of cottonwood trees. When they emerged on the other side, Delilah saw the ranch for the first time. It was not grand or impressive, but it was solid and real. The main house was a low adobe structure with a wooden porch and shuttered windows, surrounded by a few outbuildings and corrals. She could see cattle grazing in the distance, and there was a windmill turning slowly near what looked like a water tank. It was rough and plain and utterly unlike anything she had known in Philadelphia, and she loved it immediately. "It is not much," Preston said, and she heard the uncertainty in his voice. "It is perfect," Delilah said, and meant it. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her carpetbag into the house. The interior was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and rough-hewn furniture that Preston had clearly made himself. There was a main room with a fireplace and a kitchen area, and 2 smaller rooms off to the side. Preston set her bag down and looked around as though seeing the place through her eyes. "I know it needs a woman's touch," he said. "It has just been me and Jack for the past few years, and we are not much for decoration." "It is a good house," Delilah said. She walked to the window and looked out at the land stretching away in all directions. "A good home." Preston came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I am glad you think so. I want you to be happy here, Delilah. I want this to be a real marriage, not just a business arrangement." She turned to look at him, and his honey-colored eyes met hers without flinching, without looking away from her wandering gaze. "What do you mean by a real marriage?" "I mean, I want us to be partners," he said. "I want us to build a life together. I want you to feel like this is your home, not just mine. And I want us to try to care for each other, if we can." "I think I can do that," Delilah said softly. "I think I already am." Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and his fingers curled around hers with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "I know this is all strange and sudden," he said. "I know we barely know each other, but I meant what I said in my letters. I am glad you are here." "So am I," Delilah said. They stood there at the window, hands clasped, and looked out at the land that would be their future together. And for the first time in her life, Delilah felt like she belonged somewhere, like she had found a place where her wandering I did not matter, where she could simply be herself and that would be enough. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Preston woke before dawn every day to see to the cattle and the endless work of the ranch, and Delilah threw herself into making the house a home. She scrubbed and cleaned and organized. She learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove, and she started a small vegetable garden near the water tank. Jack Wilson came by most days to help Preston with the ranch work, and his wife Sarah visited twice in those first weeks, bringing gifts of preserves and bread and friendly conversation that Delilah treasured. Preston was unfailingly kind and patient, showing her how things worked on the ranch and never making her feel foolish for not knowing. He taught her how to tell the difference between a rattlesnake track and a harmless king snake, how to read the sky for signs of rain, how to handle the chickens he kept in a coop behind the house. At night, they ate supper together and talked about their days, and slowly, carefully, they began to learn each other. Delilah noticed that Preston never treated her differently because of her eye. He did not stare at it or try to pretend it was not there. He simply looked at her as though she was whole and complete exactly as she was. When she mentioned this one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he shrugged. "Your eye does not change who you are," he said simply. "It does not change your kindness or your strength or your intelligence. Why would I treat you differently because of it?" "Most people do," Delilah said. "Then most people are fools." Preston rocked back in his chair and stretched his long legs out in front of him. "Besides, you can see me just fine, can you not? You're right, I works perfectly well. That is enough for me." Delilah felt something shift in her chest, something warm and bright and almost painful. "You really believe that?" "Of course I believe it. It is the truth." He glanced at her, and in the fading light his eyes looked almost golden. "You see me just fine, Delilah. That is enough." She reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and they sat together in the gathering darkness while the stars began to appear overhead. As the weeks turned into months, Delilah felt herself falling in love with her husband. It happened gradually, in small moments that accumulated like water filling a well. The way Preston always made sure there was hot coffee waiting for her in the morning. The way he brought her wildflowers from the range, awkward and sweet in his presentation. The way he listened when she talked about her parents and her life in Philadelphia, never dismissing her memories even though they were so different from his own experiences. And the way he looked at her, always meeting her eyes without hesitation, without discomfort, as though her wandering gaze was simply part of who she was and nothing to remark upon. One evening in early June, when the heat of the day had finally broken and a cool breeze was blowing in from the mountains, Preston suggested they ride out to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Delilah had learned to ride in the months since her arrival, and though she was not particularly skilled, she could manage well enough on the gentle mare Preston had chosen for her. They rode out into the twilight, and Preston showed her the new calves that had been born that spring, sturdy little creatures with wobbly legs and curious eyes. They checked the fence line and made sure the water trough was full, and then Preston led her to a high spot where they could see for miles in every direction. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," he said as they dismounted. "I come here when I need to think." Delilah stood beside him and looked out at the vast expanse of land, the mountains dark against the deepening sky, the first stars beginning to emerge. "It is beautiful. It is." Preston was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Delilah, I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, feeling a flutter of apprehension. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you," he said, and his voice was steady but his eyes were vulnerable. "I know we have only been married a few months, and I know this started as an arrangement, but I cannot help how I feel. You are brave and strong and good, and every day I wake up grateful that you answered my letter." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Preston, I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since the day you met me at the train station and did not flinch when you saw my eye." "Your eye," Preston said, stepping closer to her, "is part of you, and I love all of you, Delilah. Every part." He kissed her then, a real kiss, deep and sweet and full of promise. Delilah wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I want this to be a real marriage in every way," Preston said quietly. "If you are willing." "I am willing," Delilah whispered. "I want that too." They rode back to the ranch as the stars filled the sky, and that night they became husband and wife in truth. Preston was gentle and careful, and Delilah felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Preston traced his fingers along her cheek, across her temple, and over the lid of her wandering eye. "Perfect," he murmured. "You are perfect." And in that moment, Delilah believed him. The summer passed in a haze of heat and hard work and growing happiness. Delilah's garden flourished, and she spent hours tending it, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. She learned to can and preserve, to make soap and render tallow, to do the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch household running. Preston taught her to shoot, patient and calm, as she learned to handle the rifle he insisted she keep in the house. "You never know what might come around when I am out on the range," he said. "I want to know you can protect yourself." She practiced until she could hit a target more often than not, and though she hoped she would never need the skill, she was glad to have it. In late July, a neighbor rancher named Thomas Mackenzie came by to discuss buying some of Preston's cattle. He was a gruff man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes, and he brought his son Ezra with him, a young man of about 19 who stared at Delilah with open curiosity when he thought she was not looking. They all sat on the porch while Preston and Thomas talked business, and Delilah served them cool water and the cookies she had baked that morning. Ezra kept stealing glances at her, and finally he blurted out, "Madam, forgive me for saying so, but there is something odd about your eyes." Delilah felt the familiar flush of shame creep up her neck, but before she could respond, Preston set down his glass with a sharp clink. "There is nothing odd about my wife," he said, and his voice was dangerously quiet. "She has a condition that makes one eye turn slightly. It does not affect her vision or her capabilities in any way, and even if it did, it would not be appropriate for you to comment on it." Thomas Mackenzie's face reddened. "Boy, apologize to Mrs. Dalton right now." Ezra looked mortified. "I am sorry, madam. I did not mean to be rude. I have never seen, it is all right," Delilah said, though her voice was tight. "I know it is unusual." "It is not unusual," Preston said, still looking at Ezra with hard eyes. "It is just part of who she is. And she is the finest woman in West Texas. So I suggest you keep your observations to yourself in the future." "Yes, sir," Ezra mumbled, staring at his boots. The conversation moved on, and the business was concluded. But after the Mackenzies left, Preston pulled Delilah into his arms and held her tight. "I am sorry," he said into her hair. "I am sorry you had to deal with that." "It is not your fault," Delilah said. "People have been saying things like that my whole life." "Well, they will not say them around me," Preston said fiercely. "Not if they want to stay welcome on my land." Delilah pulled back to look at him, and she saw the anger still simmering in his honey-colored eyes. "You really do not care, do you? About my eye?" "I care that it bothers you," Preston said. "I care that people have made you feel less than you are. But the eye itself? No, Delilah, I do not care about that at all. You see me just fine. You see everything just fine. That is all that matters." She kissed him then, there on the porch in the bright sunlight, and felt the last of the old shame begin to crumble away. August brought brutal heat and a drought that worried Preston. The creek dried up completely, and they had to rely on the well and the windmill to water the cattle. Preston spent long days moving the herd to areas with better grazing, and he came home exhausted and covered in dust. Delilah did what she could to help, bringing him cool water and hot food and quiet support at the end of each grueling day. One afternoon while Preston was out on the range, Delilah was in the garden when she heard the unmistakable sound of a rattlesnake. She froze, her heart hammering, and slowly turned her head to see the snake coiled near the water pump, its rattle vibrating in warning. She was about 15 feet away, too far to run safely, and the snake was between her and the house. She forced herself to breathe slowly and remember what Preston had taught her. Do not run. Do not make sudden movements. Back away slowly and give the snake space to escape. She took one careful step backward, then another. The snake watched her with flat, unblinking eyes. She took another step, and her heel caught on a rock and she stumbled, throwing her arms out for balance. The snake struck. Delilah jerked to the side, and the snake's fangs caught the edge of her skirt instead of her leg. She scrambled backward, and the snake slithered away into the brush, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. She stood there shaking for several minutes before her legs would support her enough to get into the house. She checked her skirt carefully and found 2 small tears where the fangs had penetrated the fabric, but her skin was unmarked. She had been lucky, incredibly lucky, and she sat down hard on the kitchen floor and tried to stop trembling. When Preston came home an hour later, she was still shaky. He took one look at her face and crossed the room in 3 strides. "What happened?" She told him about the snake, and he listened with growing concern, then inspected her skirt and checked her legs thoroughly to make sure she had not been bitten. "You did exactly right," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You stayed calm and you backed away. That probably saved your life." "I was terrified," Delilah admitted. "Being scared and being calm are not mutually exclusive," Preston said. "You were brave, Delilah." Again. She buried her face in his chest and let herself shake for a few more minutes, and Preston held her and stroked her hair and did not let go until she was ready. That night, he insisted on sitting outside with his rifle and killing 2 rattlesnakes that he found near the house. The next morning, he spent hours clearing the brush away from the immediate area around the buildings, making it less attractive to snakes. "I know we cannot eliminate all the dangers," he said as they worked together, Delilah gathering the brush he cut and piling it for burning later. "But I can at least make it safer close to the house." "I appreciate that," Delilah said, "though I have to say, the snake was less frightening than some of the people I have known." Preston stopped working and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean the snake was just doing what snakes do. It was not trying to hurt me on purpose. It was just defending itself." She wiped sweat from her forehead. "But the people who have called me cursed, who have told me I am unfit to be seen in public, who have treated me like I am broken, they chose to be cruel. That is worse than any rattlesnake." Preston set down his tools and came over to her, cupping her face in his hands. "You are not broken. You are not cursed. And anyone who ever made you feel that way deserves to meet my fist. Delilah laughed, though it came out a little watery. I do not think violence is the answer. Maybe not, Preston said. But it would make me feel better. September brought cooler temperatures and a blessed relief from the heat. The drought broke with a series of thunderstorms that filled the creek and turned the dusty rangeland green almost overnight. Preston's spirits lifted with the rain, and he spent long days assessing the condition of the herd and making plans for the winter. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching lightning flicker in the distant mountains, Preston said, I have been thinking. That sounds dangerous, Delilah teased. He smiled. I have been thinking about the future, about expanding the herd, maybe buying some of that land to the west that old man Henderson wants to sell, about building on to the house, making it bigger. That all sounds wonderful, Delilah said. But why are you thinking about making the house bigger? Preston was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I am thinking that maybe someday we might need more room for a family. Delilah's breath caught. They had not talked about children, not explicitly, though she had thought about it many times. You want children? I do, Preston said. If you do, I think you would be an amazing mother, Delilah. I think our children would be lucky to have you. What if they have my eye? Delilah asked, and her voice was very small. What if they inherit my condition? Preston turned to look at her fully. Then they will be beautiful just like their mother, and they will grow up knowing that they are loved and valued exactly as they are. And if anyone ever makes them feel bad about themselves, they will have me to answer to. Delilah felt tears slip down her cheeks. You mean that? Every word. Preston wiped her tears away with his thumbs. Your eye is not a curse, Delilah. It is not a flaw. It is just part of what makes you who you are. And if our children have it, then they will be lucky, because they will have a mother who understands and a father who will never let them doubt their worth. I love you, Delilah whispered. I love you so much. I love you too, Preston said. And he kissed her there on the porch while the lightning danced and the rain began to fall. 2 months later, Delilah missed her monthly courses, and then missed them again. Sarah Wilson came by to visit and took one look at Delilah's face and said, You are expecting, are not you? Delilah nodded, her hand going to her still flat stomach. I think so. It is early yet, but the signs are there. Sarah's face lit up with joy. Oh, that is wonderful news. Does Preston know? Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I told him. Well, do not wait too long, Sarah advised. Men can be surprisingly perceptive about these things, and you do not want him to feel left out. That evening, Delilah told Preston over supper. She had planned to make it special somehow, to find the right words, but in the end, she just blurted it out. I think I am pregnant. Preston's fork clattered onto his plate. You think you are pregnant? I am fairly certain, Delilah said, suddenly nervous. I have all the signs. Are you happy? Preston stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around. Happy? He said, his voice choked with emotion. Delilah, I am more than happy. I do not even have words. This is the best news I have ever received. He set her down carefully and dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face against her stomach. Hello in there, he said softly. This is your father. I want you to know that you are already loved more than you can possibly imagine. And no matter what you look like or who you turn out to be, you will always be perfect to us. Delilah threaded her fingers through Preston's hair and cried, and this time the tears were purely from happiness. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Preston became impossibly protective, trying to keep Delilah from doing any heavy work, until she finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not made of glass. They compromised, with Delilah agreeing to be more careful and Preston agreeing to stop hovering quite so much. In March, Sarah Wilson helped Delilah prepare for the birth, showing her what to expect and what to have ready. Preston made arrangements with the doctor in Alpine, but they all knew that if the baby came quickly, it would be just Delilah and Sarah managing on their own. As it turned out, the baby did come quickly. Delilah woke just before dawn on a cool April morning with the first contractions, and by noon she was in hard labor. Preston sent Jack racing to town for the doctor while he stayed with Delilah, holding her hand and trying not to look terrified. Sarah arrived an hour later and took charge with calm efficiency, and the doctor made it just in time to catch the baby as it entered the world. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, and the tiny infant let out a loud, indignant wail. Preston laughed and cried at the same time, and Delilah felt a wave of exhaustion and joy so intense she thought she might pass out. Sarah cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Delilah's arms. "He is perfect," Sarah said. Delilah looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and his shock of dark hair and his eyes that were squeezed shut as he cried. And then he opened those eyes, and Delilah's heart stopped. Both of his eyes were perfectly straight, tracking together as they should. "Oh," she breathed. Preston leaned over her shoulder, looking at their son, and she felt him go still. "He does not have your eye." "No," Delilah said, and she could not quite identify the tangle of emotions in her chest. Relief? Disappointment? Guilt? Preston kissed the top of her head. "That is all right. He has your chin. And your stubborn streak, if the way he is yelling is any indication." Delilah laughed through her tears. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking about my grandfather's name," Preston said. "Michael, if you like it." "Michael," Delilah repeated, testing the sound. "Michael Dalton." "I like it very much." They spent the rest of the day marveling over their son, counting his tiny fingers and toes, watching the way he rooted for milk and settled against Delilah's chest. The doctor checked them both over and pronounced them healthy, and Sarah stayed until evening to make sure everything was going well. After everyone had left and it was just the three of them, Preston sat on the edge of the bed with his arm around Delilah, and they both looked at their sleeping son. "Are you disappointed?" Delilah asked quietly. "That he does not have my eye?" Preston looked at her in surprise. "Disappointed? Why would I be disappointed?" "Because you said such beautiful things about how it would not matter if he inherited my condition. And now he did not, and I wondered if you felt like, I do not know, like the universe was agreeing that it is better not to have it." "Delilah." Preston turned to face her fully. "I meant every word I said. If Michael had been born with a wandering eye like yours, I would have loved him exactly the same. But he was not, and I love him exactly the same. The shape of his eyes does not change who he is, or how much he is loved." "I know," Delilah said. "I do know that. It is just, I feel strange. Like I wanted him to have my eye so that I could prove to him that it does not matter. So that I could raise him without shame and show him that he is perfect as he is." "You can still do that," Preston said gently. "You can teach him to look at people with compassion instead of judgment. You can teach him that differences are nothing to fear. You can teach him to be kind and brave and true, just like his mother." Delilah leaned her head on Preston's shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" "I married you," Preston said simply. "That was the wisest thing I ever did." Little Michael thrived, growing strong and healthy. He had Preston's honey-colored eyes and Delilah's dark hair, and he seemed to inherit the best qualities of both his parents. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. As the months passed, Delilah found that she loved being a mother. It was exhausting and overwhelming and occasionally frustrating, but it was also the most fulfilling thing she had ever done. Preston was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about the ranch even though Michael was far too young to understand. One afternoon when Michael was about 6 months old, Delilah was sitting on the porch with him when a wagon came up the drive. She did not recognize it, and she felt a flutter of nervousness as a well-dressed couple climbed down. The woman was middle-aged and severe-looking, and the man had the bearing of someone used to authority. "Good afternoon," Delilah called out, standing with Michael in her arms. "Can I help you?" "We are looking for Preston Dalton," the man said. "Is he here?" "He is out checking the herd," Delilah said. "I am his wife, Delilah. Is there something I can help you with?" The woman's gaze swept over Delilah and then fixed on her face with an intensity that made Delilah's stomach clench. "There is something wrong with your eyes." "Margaret," the man said sharply. "Well, there is, Harold. One of them is looking off to the side." The woman stepped closer, peering at Delilah. "Good heavens, how do you manage? Can you even see properly?" Delilah felt the old familiar shame rising, but she pushed it down. "I see perfectly well, thank you. Who are you? And what is your business with my husband?" "I am Harold Jenkins, and this is my wife Margaret," the man said, looking embarrassed. "We are from the land office in Alpine. Your husband wrote to us about purchasing some additional acreage. We came out to discuss the details and survey the property lines." "Preston should be back within the hour," Delilah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You are welcome to wait on the porch." "How do you take care of that baby with your vision problem?" Margaret asked, still staring at Delilah's eye. "It must be terribly difficult." "It is not difficult at all," Delilah said, and she felt anger beginning to replace the shame. "My vision is fine. The alignment of my eyes does not affect my ability to see or to care for my son." "Well, I do not know about that," Margaret said doubtfully. "It seems like it would be a handicap. And what if the child inherited it? That would be a terrible burden for him to carry." "If he had inherited it, it would not be a burden," Delilah said, and her voice was sharp now. "It would simply be part of who he is. There is nothing wrong with me, Mrs. Jenkins, no matter what you might think." Now, no need to get upset," Harold said quickly. "My wife did not mean any offense." "Did I not?" Margaret said. "I am simply being honest. The girl has a deformity. It is nothing to be ashamed of, but it is also nothing to pretend does not exist." "It is not a deformity," Delilah said, and her hands tightened protectively around Michael. "It is a condition called strabismus. It is relatively common, it does not affect my health or my capabilities, and it is certainly not something that makes me less able to be a wife and mother." Before Margaret could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced Preston's arrival. He dismounted quickly and strode over to the porch, and Delilah saw the moment he took in the scene, saw the way his expression darkened. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, his voice cold, "I see you have met my wife." "Yes, and I was just expressing my concern about her vision problem," Margaret said. "I do hope it does not interfere with the running of the household." Preston's jaw tightened. "There is nothing wrong with my wife's vision. There is nothing wrong with my wife at all. And if you cannot keep your rude observations to yourself, Mrs. Jenkins, then you and your husband can turn around and leave right now, and I will find someone else to handle the land purchase." Harold Jenkins looked mortified. "Mr. Dalton, please accept my apologies. My wife sometimes speaks without thinking. She seems to be thinking quite clearly about being insulting," Preston said. "Delilah is the finest woman I have ever known. She is smart and brave and strong, and she is an excellent mother. The fact that one of her eyes turns slightly does not change any of that. It does not make her less capable, less beautiful, or less worthy of respect." "I was only saying," Margaret began. "I do not care what you were saying," Preston interrupted. "You came to my home and you insulted my wife. That is unacceptable. Harold, I suggest you and your wife get back in your wagon and drive back to Alpine. I will come by the land office tomorrow to discuss the property purchase. Assuming you still want to do business with me after this. Of course we do, Harold said quickly. He grabbed Margaret's arm and steered her toward the wagon. We apologize for any offense. Margaret, get in the wagon. They drove away, and Preston turned to Delilah, his face still dark with anger. Are you all right? I am fine, Delilah said, though her voice shook slightly. She was just being nosy and rude. She was being cruel, Preston corrected. He pulled her and Michael into his arms, careful of the baby. I am sorry you had to deal with that. It is not your fault. Delilah leaned against him. Though I appreciate you sending them away. I should have done more, Preston said. I should have, I do not know, hit him or something. Despite everything, Delilah laughed. Violence is not the answer, remember? Maybe not, but it would have been satisfying. Preston kissed the top of her head. Then Michael's. I mean what I said, Delilah. You are the finest woman I know. That foolish woman does not have the sense God gave a jackrabbit. You see me just fine, Delilah said softly, echoing his words from months ago. That is enough. It is more than enough, Preston said. It is everything. The seasons turned, and Michael grew from a baby into a toddler, walking and then running everywhere on sturdy legs. He was fearless and curious, and he required constant supervision to keep him from getting into trouble. Delilah loved watching him explore the world, and Preston was endlessly patient in showing their son how things worked on the ranch. When Michael was 2 years old, Delilah found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more fatigue and nausea, but Delilah pushed through it with Preston's unwavering support. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born on a snowy January morning in 1885. Rose came into the world with a loud cry and a full head of red gold hair that surprised both parents. Though Preston's mother had apparently had auburn hair, the doctor pronounced her healthy, and Sarah cooed over her, and Michael was fascinated by his tiny sister. And when Rose opened her eyes for the first time, Delilah saw immediately that the baby's left eye turned outward, just like her own. She caught her breath, staring down at her daughter, and felt a complicated rush of emotions. Preston leaned over her shoulder and went very still. She has your eye, he said softly. Yes, Delilah whispered. They were both quiet for a moment, and then Preston said, She is beautiful, just like her mother. Delilah looked up at him through tears. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything. Preston reached out and touched Rose's tiny cheek with one calloused finger. Look at her, Delilah. She is perfect. Absolutely perfect. And looking down at her daughter, at the way Rose's mismatched eyes blinked up at her with newborn confusion, Delilah felt something inside her finally, completely heal. All her life, she had been taught that her wandering eye was a flaw, a curse, something to be ashamed of. But looking at Rose, she saw only beauty. She saw a strong, healthy baby girl who would grow up knowing she was loved exactly as she was. You are right, Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. She is perfect. Preston kissed her, long and tender, just like her mother. As Rose grew, Delilah watched her with a fierce, protective love. She knew what it was like to be stared at, to be pitted or mocked or treated as less than. But she was determined that Rose would have a different experience. Preston was equally determined, and together they created a home where Rose was simply their beloved daughter, where her wandering eye was never treated as anything shameful or strange. Michael adored his little sister and was protective of her in the way only an older brother could be. When he was 4 and Rose was 2, they went into Alpine together as a family, and a shopkeeper made a comment about Rose's eye. Before Delilah or Preston could respond, Michael stepped forward and said in his most serious voice, "There is nothing wrong with my sister. She is perfect." The shopkeeper had the grace to look ashamed, and Preston later told Michael how proud he was. That night, Preston held both children on his lap and told them a story about a princess with magic eyes that could see things no one else could see, and how she saved her kingdom because she looked at the world differently. "Your mama has magic eyes too," Preston told Rose, who was drowsing against his chest. "And so do you. You can see the world in a special way, and that makes you remarkable." Rose was too young to understand, but Delilah knew that in time, with parents who believed those words with their whole hearts, Rose would grow up understanding that she was valued and loved for exactly who she was. The years passed in a blur of work and laughter and love. The ranch prospered, and Preston was able to purchase the additional land he wanted, expanding their holdings and their herd. Michael grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and spent every possible moment helping his father. Rose was a whirlwind of energy and mischief, bright and fearless and utterly herself. When Rose was 5 years old and starting to ask questions about why her eye looked different from other people's, Delilah sat her down and told her the truth. "Some people are born with eyes that look straight ahead all the time," she said, holding Rose in her lap. "And some people, like you and me, are born with one eye that wanders a little bit. It does not mean there is anything wrong with us. It just means we are different." "But some people stare," Rose said, and her voice was small. "That boy in town yesterday kept looking at me funny." "I know," Delilah said, her heart aching for her daughter. "And I am sorry that happened. Some people are not used to seeing eyes like ours, and they forget their manners. But you know what the most important thing is?" "What?" "The most important thing is that you know you are perfect exactly as you are. Your papa and I love you more than anything in the world. Michael loves you, and there is nothing about you that needs to be fixed or changed." "Mama, do you wish my eye was different?" Rose asked, looking up at her with those mismatched eyes that were so like Delilah's own. "No," Delilah said firmly. "I do not wish that at all. Because if your eye was different, you would not be you. And you are my favorite Rose in the whole world." Rose seemed satisfied with that answer, and she ran off to play. Preston, who had been standing in the doorway listening, came over and wrapped his arms around Delilah from behind. "You are an amazing mother," he said quietly. "I just told her the truth," Delilah said. "You told her she is loved," Preston corrected. "You told her she is valued. You gave her what you never had growing up. That is not just truth, Delilah. That is grace." In 1890, when Michael was 7 and Rose was 5, Delilah found herself pregnant once more. She was 30 years old now, and this pregnancy was the hardest yet. But she made it through with her usual determination and Preston's constant support. Their third child, a boy they named Thomas, was born in late September with his father's honey-colored eyes, both of them perfectly straight. Delilah had wondered if she would feel disappointed again, as she had with Michael, but she found that she did not. Thomas was his own person, perfect in his own way, and she loved him as fiercely as she loved his siblings. One evening when Thomas was a few months old, Preston and Delilah sat on the porch watching Michael and Rose play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. "Do you remember the first day we met?" Preston asked suddenly. "Of course I remember," Delilah said. "I was terrified and exhausted and convinced you were going to take one look at me and send me back to Philadelphia. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Preston said. "Coming all that way to marry a stranger, trusting that I would be true to my word." "You have been true to your word every day since," Delilah said softly. "You told me you were not looking for perfect, only for true, and you have shown me every single day what that means." Preston reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had done so many times over the years. "Do you remember what I said to you that night on the porch? About your eye. You said I see you just fine, and that is enough." "I meant it then and I mean it now," Preston said. "You see me, Delilah. You see our children. You see this life we have built together. You see all the things that matter. The rest is just noise." Delilah looked at her husband, at the man who had taken her in when she was desperate and alone, who had looked past the thing that everyone else saw first, who had taught her that she was worthy of love and respect and happiness. She thought about the life they had built together in this harsh, beautiful land, about the children they were raising to be kind and brave and true. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I tell you that often enough. But I love you, Preston. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Preston said. "You are my whole world, Delilah. You and those 3 wild children in the yard. You are everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed I could have." They sat together in the fading light, hands clasped, and watched their children play. Michael was showing Rose how to rope a fence post, and Rose was laughing at her own clumsy attempts. Thomas slept peacefully in his cradle next to Delilah's chair, his tiny fingers curled into fists. Years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The children grew and learned and thrived. Michael became a skilled rancher, working side by side with his father and eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Rose grew into a strong, confident young woman who refused to let anyone make her feel inferior because of her wandering eye. She had learned from watching her mother, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Thomas, the youngest, became the family's scholar, fascinated by books and learning in a way his siblings were not. Preston and Delilah encouraged all their children's interests, wanting them to find their own paths in life. When Rose was 13, a traveling photographer came through Alpine, and Preston insisted on having a family portrait made. Delilah was reluctant at first, knowing that photographs would capture her wandering eye permanently, but Rose took her hand and said, "Mama, we should do it. I want to remember us exactly as we are." So they all dressed in their best clothes and went to the photographer's studio in town. The photographer positioned them carefully, Preston standing behind Delilah with his hands on her shoulders, Michael and Thomas on one side and Rose on the other. When the photographer looked through his camera, he paused. "Madam, I think you should turn your head slightly," he said to Delilah, "to minimize the issue with your eye." Before Delilah could respond, Preston said firmly, "My wife will face the camera straight on, just like the rest of us. There is no issue to minimize." The photographer opened his mouth as though to argue, but Preston's expression stopped him. "As you wish, sir." They took the photograph, all 5 of them looking straight at the camera, and when it was developed, Delilah thought it was the most beautiful picture she had ever seen. There was her family, honest and real, with love shining from every face. Her wandering eye was clearly visible, as was Rose's, and she felt no shame looking at it. Only pride and gratitude and deep, abiding joy. The photograph hung in a place of honor in their home for the rest of their lives. In 1898, when Rose was 18 and beginning to receive attention from young men in town, one particular suitor began calling regularly. His name was Daniel Pierce, and he was a decent young man from a neighboring ranch. Preston approved of him, and Rose seemed to like him well enough. But Delilah noticed that her daughter was reserved around Daniel, not quite herself. One evening after Daniel had left, Delilah found Rose sitting on the porch alone, staring out at the darkening landscape. "Do you want to talk about it?" Delilah asked, sitting down beside her daughter. "Talk about what?" "About whatever is troubling you. You have been different lately, quieter." Rose was silent for a long moment, and then she said, "Daniel is nice. He is respectful and kind, and he has good prospects. But Mama, when he looks at me, he always looks at my right eye. He never looks at my left eye. It is like he is pretending it does not exist." Delilah understood immediately. "He makes you feel like you need to hide part of yourself." "Yes," Rose said, and her voice was thick with unshed tears. "And I know I should be grateful that he does not stare at it or say cruel things about it. But it makes me feel like he is only accepting half of me. Like he is tolerating my I rather than accepting it." "Then he is not the right man for you," Delilah said firmly. "Rose, you deserve someone who loves all of you. Not someone who pretends parts of you do not exist, and not someone who merely tolerates you. You deserve someone who looks at you the way your father looks at me. Like I am perfect," Rose asked a little wistfully. "Like you are complete," Delilah corrected. "Your father never pretended my eye was not there, but he also never treated it as though it was a flaw that needed overlooking. He just accepted it as part of who I am. That is what you deserve too." Rose leaned her head on Delilah's shoulder. "What if I never find that? What if Daniel is the best I can hope for? Then you stay unmarried and live your life on your own terms," Delilah said. "Being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel less than whole. Trust me, I spent years believing I would never marry because of my eye. And then your father came along and showed me what real acceptance looks like. If it happened for me, it can happen for you too." 2 weeks later, Rose kindly but firmly told Daniel Pierce that she did not think they would suit each other after all. He was disappointed but gracious about it, and Rose seemed relieved to be free of the relationship. 6 months later, she met a young surveyor named James Fletcher who had come to Alpine to map some of the newer ranch properties. James looked Rose straight in both eyes when he talked to her, never flinching or looking away from her wandering gaze, and when he asked her to dinner, he said, "I would be honored if you would accompany me, Miss Dalton. You have the most interesting eyes I have ever seen. They make me want to know everything about you." Rose came home from that dinner glowing, and when she told her parents about James, Preston and Delilah exchanged a knowing look. They had seen this before, the way the right person could make all the difference. James Fletcher courted Rose properly for a year, and then he asked Preston for permission to marry her. Preston gave his blessing, and the wedding was held in the same small church in Alpine where Preston and Delilah had married nearly 20 years earlier. On Rose's wedding day, Delilah helped her daughter dress and pin up her hair, and they stood together in front of the mirror in the little room at the back of the church. "You are so beautiful," Delilah said, looking at Rose's reflection. "So are you, Mama." Rose turned to face her mother. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that I am enough," Rose said. "For teaching me not to settle for someone who could not love all of me. For being brave enough to come to Texas and marry a stranger, because if you had not, I would not be here." Delilah pulled her daughter into her arms and held her tight. "You are the best part of me, Rose. You and your brothers. You are the reason for everything." They walked together to the church, and Preston met them at the door. He looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes, and he said, "You are the image of your mother, and that is the highest compliment I know how to give." He walked Rose down the aisle and placed her hand in James's, and when James looked at Rose, Delilah saw the same expression she had seen on Preston's face all those years ago. Complete acceptance, total love, the recognition that he was holding something precious. The years rolled on with their inexorable rhythm. Michael married a practical, level-headed woman named Catherine and took over the ranch operations entirely, allowing Preston to finally slow down a little. Thomas went to college in San Antonio, studying to become a teacher, and he eventually returned to Alpine to run the local school. Rose and James built a house on the edge of town and had 4 children of their own, 2 of whom inherited Rose's wandering eye. Preston and Delilah grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming wrinkled and spotted, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, becoming something solid and unshakable, the foundation upon which their entire family was built. In 1912, when Delilah was 52 years old and Preston was 57, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party, and there was food and music and laughter that echoed across the rangeland. As the sun began to set, Preston took Delilah's hand and led her away from the crowd, back to the spot on the high ground where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. "Do you remember this place?" he asked. "Of course I remember," Delilah said. "This is where everything changed." "This is where I told you the truth," Preston corrected. "That I loved you. That I loved all of you, including your wandering eye. You changed my life," Delilah said softly. "You took a woman who thought she was unlovable and showed her what real love looks like." Preston cupped her face in his weathered hands, the same way he had done countless times over the past 30 years. "You see me just fine," he said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "You always have. That is all that matters." "That is all that matters," Delilah agreed. He kissed her there on the hilltop, with the sky turning gold around them and the sound of their family's laughter drifting up from below. And Delilah thought about that frightened girl who had stepped off the train in Alpine 30 years ago, convinced she was broken and cursed, and she wished she could go back and tell that girl what she knew now. "You are not broken. You are not cursed. You are exactly as you are supposed to be. And someday you will meet a man who will look at you and see only beauty. He will tell you that you see him just fine, and that will be enough. He will love you with his whole heart, and you will build a life together that is more beautiful than anything you ever dreamed. You will have children and grandchildren. You will have a daughter with eyes like yours, and you will raise her to know she is perfect. You will grow old with a man who never once made you feel less than whole. And you will look back on your life and realize that the thing you thought was a curse was actually a gift, because it brought you here, to this place, to this love, to this life. You will be happy, little one. More happy than you can possibly imagine." Preston pulled back and smiled at her, and Delilah saw everything in that smile. 30 years of partnership, of love, of building a life together in this wild, beautiful place. She saw the young cowboy who had met her at the train station and looked at her wandering eye without flinching. She saw the man who had defended her honor and protected their children and never, ever made her feel like she was anything less than extraordinary. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Delilah said. "I am thinking about how that scared girl who came to Texas never imagined she could have all of this. And I am thinking about how grateful I am that you wrote back to my advertisement." "I am the lucky one," Preston said. "I asked for a wife and I got a partner. I asked for someone true and I got someone extraordinary. I asked for someone to share my life and I got the love of a lifetime." They stood together on the hilltop as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them for 30 years. And down below, their children and grandchildren celebrated, secure in the love that Preston and Delilah had built, the foundation that would carry on for generations to come. Delilah rested her head on Preston's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and strong and steady. This was home, not the ranch, not the house, but this man who had looked at her with honest eyes and seen not a flaw but a person. This man who had taught her that she was worthy of love, that her wandering eye was not a curse but simply a part of who she was. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me," Delilah said. "For really seeing me. All of me." Preston kissed the top of her head. "You see me just fine," he said one more time. "That is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough." And there on the hilltop, under the wide Texas sky, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Delilah knew that he was right. She saw him just fine, and he saw her just fine. And that was not just enough. It was everything. The party continued below them, and eventually they made their way back down to join their family. Their grandson, Rose's oldest boy who had inherited his mother's and grandmother's wandering eye, ran up to them and threw his arms around Delilah's waist. "Grandma, Grandpa, come dance," he said. Preston took Delilah's hand and led her to where someone had set up a space for dancing. The music was simple, played on a fiddle and guitar, and Preston spun her around the way he had done when they were young. Her joints ached and her hair was gray, and her eyes still wandered just as it always had. But in that moment, she felt as beautiful and cherished as she had on their wedding day 30 years ago. Their children watched them dance, and their grandchildren watched them dance, and the love between them was so tangible that everyone who witnessed it felt blessed just to be in its presence. This was the legacy they were leaving behind. Not land or money or possessions, but the knowledge that real love was possible, that acceptance was not just a word but a choice you made every single day, that the things the world called flaws could be transformed into gifts by the right person's perspective. As the evening wore on and the stars grew brighter, Delilah found herself standing with Rose and Rose's daughter Emily, who was 10 years old and had her grandmother's and mother's wandering eye. Emily had been dealing with teasing at school, and Rose had brought her to spend some time at the ranch, hoping that being around family who understood would help. "Grandma," Emily said softly, "do you ever wish your eye was different?" Delilah knelt down so she was eye level with her granddaughter. "Do you know what I wish, Emily?" "What?" "I wish I had learned earlier what your grandfather taught me, that my eye does not define me. It is just part of me, like my brown hair or my height or my stubbornness. And I wish I had not wasted so many years feeling ashamed of something that is not shameful at all." "But people stare," Emily said, her voice small. "Yes, they do," Delilah agreed. "And that is their problem, not yours. Because staring is rude, and people who are rude are showing you who they are, not who you are. You are perfect, Emily. Your mama is perfect. I am perfect. And our eyes are just part of what makes us who we are." "Grandpa says we have magic eyes," Emily said, "that we can see things other people cannot see." "Your grandpa is a very wise man," Delilah said, "and he is right. We do see things differently. We see who people really are because we have learned not to judge by appearances. We see beauty in unexpected places. We see the world with compassion and understanding. That is magic, Emily. Real magic." Emily thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "I think I understand." "Good," Delilah said, pulling her granddaughter into a hug. "Because you are going to grow up to do amazing things, sweet girl. And someday you will meet someone who looks at you the way your grandpa looks at me. And when that happens, you will know you have found someone who deserves you." Rose put her hand on Delilah's shoulder, and the three of them stood together, 3 generations of women with wandering eyes, standing tall and proud under the Texas stars. Preston came over to join them, and he wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. "My favorite ladies," he said. "All perfect, every one." And in that moment, surrounded by family, held by the man who had changed her life, Delilah felt a completeness that she had never imagined possible all those years ago when she stepped off the train in Alpine. She had come to Texas expecting only survival, hoping at best for tolerance. Instead, she had found love and acceptance and a family that celebrated every part of her, including the part she had been taught to hide. The years continued to pass, and Preston and Delilah grew older still. They spent their days on the porch of the ranch house, watching the land they loved and the family they had built. They held hands and told stories and laughed at memories only they shared. And every day, without fail, Preston would look at Delilah and tell her she was beautiful. "You see me just fine," he would say. "That is enough." And every day, Delilah would smile and squeeze his hand and know, down to the very core of her being, that she was loved exactly as she was. When Preston passed away in 1925 at the age of 70, Delilah was devastated but not broken. He had loved her so completely, so thoroughly, that even in death, that love sustained her. She lived another 15 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the brave cowboy who had looked at her wandering eye and seen only a woman worth loving. She told them about the letter that changed her life, about the train ride to Alpine, about the moment Preston met her at the station and did not flinch. She told them about the first time he said, "You see me just fine," and how those words had become the foundation of their marriage. She told them about building a life together in the harsh beauty of West Texas, about raising children who knew they were loved unconditionally, about the quiet joy of growing old with someone who truly saw you. And she made sure that every single one of her descendants who inherited her wandering eye knew that they were perfect, that they were loved, that the thing the world might see as a flaw was actually a gift that had brought her to the greatest love she had ever known. When Delilah died in 1940 at the age of 80, she was buried next to Preston on the hilltop where he had first told her he loved her. Her children made sure there was a marker that read, "Delilah Dalton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She saw clearly with eyes of love. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and the story of Preston and Delilah became legend. It was told and retold, passed down from parents to children, a reminder that real love was not about perfection but about acceptance, not about hiding flaws but about celebrating the whole person. And at the heart of the story was always the same message, the words Preston had spoken to Delilah that first evening on the porch. "You see me just fine. That is enough." Because in the end, that was what love was. Not about grand gestures or perfect romance, but about being seen and accepted exactly as you are. It was about finding someone who looked at all of you, the parts the world celebrated and the parts the world condemned, and said, "Yes, this, all of this, you are enough." That was the legacy Preston and Delilah left behind. Not just a ranch or a family tree, but a love story that proved that the right person would always see you clearly, would always love you completely, and would always tell you that you were enough exactly as you were. And somewhere, in the stars above the Texas desert, two souls who had found each other against all odds continued to dance, held together by a love that had transcended time and space and every obstacle the world had tried to place in their path. A love built on honesty and acceptance and the simple truth that seeing each other clearly was the greatest gift they could give. You see me just fine. That is enough. It had been enough then. It would be enough always. And for every person who ever felt broken or less than, the story of Preston and Delilah stood as proof that somewhere out there was someone who would look at them and see only perfection, only beauty, only love. That was the promise. That was the hope. That was the legacy they left behind, written in the very soil of the ranch they built together, carried on in the eyes of every descendant who inherited Delilah's wandering gaze, whispered in the wind that blew across the West Texas rangeland. You are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough. And if you are very lucky, you will find someone who sees you just fine. And that will be everything.